a lot of the times from central office, we were telling teachers and asking them to do things we didn't know how to do ourselves. I knew back then that I had no interest in being a transactional leader. A transactional leader is someone who says, well, okay, here's the curriculum and here's the resources, here's the PD, here's the book, here's inspiration. Now figure it out. I wanted to be a transformational leader, someone who has the knowledge and the skill sets to show all educators, whether administrators who are supporting teachers or teachers who are supporting kids, how to improve in their craft. And if there's something I didn't know how to do myself, then I can find the right coach or the right resource and learn alongside my colleagues.
You are now listening to the Lifelong Learning Defined podcast with your host, Jorge Valenzuela.
This is education coach Jorge Valenzuela. Welcome to the Lifelong Learning Defined podcast, where I provide all educators, whether instructional leaders or teachers, tips on how to be their best both personally and professionally. Now let's get into it.
My name is Toni Rose, a designated hype person at MCP, and I am joined by Jorge Valenzuela, who is a highly sought after and well-regarded performance and education coach, author, and speaker at Lifelong Learning Defined. Y'all, I'm so excited to be in this space with Jorge. We met, I believe, last year, actually, and so it's just been such a joy getting to know Jorge throughout the couple of months. And so welcome, Jorge.
Thank you, Toni. We need to shout out Jorge.
Yes.
Jorge, if she's listening, if she's watching, she's the reason why we're connected. And she often says, I'm a connector.
Yeah. And it really helps with inspiring me to be a connector as well. Right. So, and that was one of the things that we all kind of talked about when we were in the space together of like, hey, I know dope people, you know dope people. Let's put them all in the same room and then just continue to enhance and make our lives a little bit better. And so, yes, Jorge, miss you, love you. We are going to touch base soon, I'm sure. And so it's so exciting again, to be in this space with you. And thank you so much for saying yes to the podcast. So Jorge, before we get started, this is my favorite question. What is currently bringing you joy?
Right now, everything in my life, all the people that I've chosen to be my family, my children, my pet, my career moves, it's taking a long time. I am living a life of my own making. It's taken me over 40 years, but I finally have done it for the audience. Hopefully this is to give people hope if they need hope. I turned 49 this year. Maybe 4 weeks ago, I told myself, you are finally the man that you've always wanted to be. It's taken me a while, but I can say that now I'm living that.
Oh my gosh, I love that so much, Jorge. And I think for me, definitely needed to hear that because sometimes being in my own head of like, oh, it's taking so long. It's taking forever to do this like one thing or to disrupt this pattern. And so thank you for just validating that experience and sharing with us what is currently bringing you joy. Let's talk a little bit more about your teaching journey, how it led to the work that you're currently doing as an entrepreneur with lifelong learning.
I got into the classroom and started out as a computer science and STEM teacher. And I did that for about 5 years. Then I got my administrative license and I realized in the internship that I don't want to be a principal. I didn't want to be an AP, definitely did not want to spend my days doing cafeteria duty, bus duty, or referrals. So I stayed in the classroom. And one day, fate intervened, and someone from central office at Richmond City Public Schools walked into my classroom and she saw me teach. She was very impressed and she encouraged me to apply for the instructional leadership position for my content area, which is technology and engineering education. To be honest, I didn't have the confidence I do now, but I learned this, Toni. Relationships are the most important thing in life. And when people see potential in you that you don't see in yourself, and they like you, they have to like you, they're going to help you. She kept encouraging me for about 6 months. Finally, I applied, I interviewed, and I got the job. And when I got the job, Toni, I realized that a lot of the times from central office, we were telling teachers and asking them to do things we didn't know how to do ourselves. I knew back then that I had no interest in being a transactional leader. A transactional leader is someone who says, well, okay, here's the curriculum and here's the resources, here's the PD, here's the book, here's inspiration. Now figure it out. I wanted to be a transformational leader, someone who has the knowledge and the skill sets to show all educators, whether administrators who are supporting teachers or teachers who are supporting kids, how to improve in their craft. And if there's something I didn't know how to do myself, then I can find the right coach or the right resource and learn alongside my colleagues. I became a master teacher at the Buck Institute for Education around 2014, 2015-ish. Then I got into the PhD program and I learned the science behind all of the strategies that I use in my work. And now I use that knowledge and I co-create with other educators, learn from them as well. But we co-create systems for many topics pertaining to instructional innovation, which you read in my bio, which is why I do what I do today. If you're watching this on YouTube or listening on Spotify or iTunes, please hit the subscribe button. Please hit the like button and share this episode with your family, friends, and colleagues who are interested in self-improvement through lifelong learning. And now for a word from one of our sponsors.
Education is changing. Classrooms look different, and the future demands that our students be equipped for whatever comes their way. Educators play a huge role in helping prepare students for their futures. Defined Learning is a K-12 standards-aligned PBL solution that provides high-quality cross-curricular performance tasks across content areas such as ELA, math, science, social studies, computer science, and more. The hands-on projects are based on real-world situations and allow students to apply their learning. Education is changing. Give students the tools and experiences to recognize their futures and make an incredible impact on the world. Defined, the authority on applied learning.
We had the pleasure of listening to George this morning on project-based learning, and he shared his story that his aunt encouraged him to go into education. And she was absolutely right. He is so talented at sharing information in a way that is easy to digest and is inspiring to go back and actually implement and make change.
So my takeaway is that Mr. Valenzuela was very inspiring. He was very motivational and helped me to think about a new way of getting my teachers excited.
When I set out to do a workshop, my key deliverable is energy. And this momentum is used to make connections, inspire, educate, and ultimately transform the audience so that they're compelled to take that same energy back to their schools and communities. And although we have fun, we tackle the hard topics of today, like educational policy, pedagogy for improving curriculum and instruction, and empowering today's students by connecting our work to the needs of the workforce. So please consider Lifelong Learning Defined for your next keynote, workshop, or conference, and overall instructional and educational coaching needs. My name is George, and I hope to connect with you soon.
We would love to have you come and do some work with us and help us be a little more successful and help our students to be more successful.
I mean, George, I know that one of the things that I really appreciate about you was that I was able to see you in action and present at a session, right? And just your ability to be vulnerable and also being able to share, like, hey, these are all the things that worked for me. It may work for you. It may not work for you, but like, these are the steps that I actually went through to get to where I am now. And I think the audience really, really loved how real you were and you just sharing, like, this is where, this is how I got here. These are all the things that I've tried. And I want to be mindful of like you not wasting your time, right? And like, just go ahead and sharing all the things that I went through so that you don't have to go through it, which I also really, really love.
Can I tell you why though?
Yeah, go for it.
I was doing a presentation at my district, Richmond City Public Schools, in 2017. I did my presentation. You're a speaker as well, so you know that we rehearse and that we polish ourselves up. You don't leave anything to chance. You do everything that's in your control. 2 young teachers approached me afterwards, and they were like, man, we want to do what you do, but I don't think I could do that. I realized in that moment, if you don't share your story the way it is, then you're making people think you're more than you are. The truth is, no one is smarter than anyone. No one is better than anyone. People just have more experience. I never want someone to see me and think that they can't do it if it's what they want to do. I want people to say, if he can do it, I can do it.
Yeah. And I think, going back to what you were saying about a leader who came up to you and said, hey, I think you'd be perfect at this instructional leadership position, right? And it took 6 months of that person getting you to believe in yourself, right? And I think I was just watching this TikTok video and it was all about it only takes one person to say that they believe in you to change that trajectory of what you thought you could or could not do, right? And so I really love this whole concept of that, there's a lot of imposter syndrome in people, right? People experience that a lot of the times. And then it's this whole concept of, I don't think I could do that. And again, you being able to say no, let's shift some things. Let's make it happen for you. Cause I'm sure you have the skill set that we may need to just continue practicing. And then also understanding that it takes time. It doesn't actually you just don't do it the first time and then you're good at it. And I think that's with anything.
Yes, exactly. You got it.
Yeah. And so, George, another question for me, you talked about transactional versus transformational leadership. And I do really love these two terms because it really does provide examples of just way of being, right? A ways of being. And so I think let's name the fact that you are a male of color in education, right? And just the fact that you want to be transformational. So you have to really be in tune with what you don't know and how you go about finding ways to learn, right? Because I think sometimes not just men, but also just human beings, right? Ego and pride come into place. And that I think sometimes turns into transactional leadership. So how did you do this work within yourself to be vulnerable, to know and to be able to say oh, wait a minute, I actually don't know what I'm doing. I need to do something.
I'm going to back up a little bit and tell you about when I was a kid. I grew up in the 80s. In the 80s, we just didn't backtalk adults. We just yes, ma'am, yes, sir, all of that. And I remember that whenever an adult would tell me something I didn't want to hear, I would yes, ma'am, and yes, sir them to death. But in my mind, I was thinking, I'm going to do whatever I want to do. It doesn't matter. Say whatever you got to say. But as soon as you're done, I'm going to do me. And I remember being this way. But for some reason, whatever they would say, it's almost like they were planting seeds and they would play back throughout my life at times when I needed to hear it. For example, I was in foster care. I was in a group home. And I remember my 18th birthday or shortly thereafter, they told me, you have to go on your own now. I was very scared. And I looked in the mirror and I said something that an adult told me. I am taking responsibility for my life today. Not knowing what that meant. Fast forward a few years, and I believe it was at the age of 25. I realized that all the advice I was given, a lot of it was accurate, and I didn't know what I was doing. As I became a professional, as I got into my instructional leadership position, I remember my mentor sitting me down. My district assigned me a mentor. So for districts out there, if you can assign mentors to your young leaders, please do so. Young teachers as well. It's very important. He told me, C&I, and for the audience, that's curriculum and instruction. He said, that's a big topic. And we have 50 schools and we have a district and we have funding and we have all these different things that you're going to have to learn. It's going to take you 9 years to learn this job. And in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, hell no. In 3 years, I'm done with this and I'm moving on to bigger and better. That was the mindset. And as I got into the job, I left the job exactly 9 years later. As I got into the space and as a male and just being honest, we're living in a time where there's other voices that are being heard. I've come to realize that no one cares about my opinion unless if they're paying me to come and do something. It's not a bad thing, right? Why is my opinion and why are my thoughts and my way of thinking and being most important? I've had to ask myself that over the years. And that's why if you notice on my social media, you never hear my opinion. I'm giving you the work that I do. Now on my personal social media, you'll see more glimpses of who I am and my personal life because that's for my friends and family. But on my professional, it's not for my friends and family, and it's not for my contemporaries. It's for people that need the information. I'm very aware of what my brand is. My personal brand, what I live every day, is lifelong learning for self-improvement, personal and professional growth. The content that you're seeing is either to make you better in your profession or as a person, whether it's instructional innovation, project-based learning, emotional intelligence, the podcast, whatever it is. I am very intuitive of what I'm doing. I understand my role in society. I am a role model, but I'm not a role model for every person. My mentor sat me down before I started the PhD program. And she said, George, for African-American women, I was in the 11th percentile for PhDs back in 2001 when I graduated. And it's probably less for Hispanics and Latinos. You're a role model for your people, whether you think you are or not. And what you do and what you say can either open or close doors. In the back of my mind, these things are always there. I have found that when you accept who you are and what you have to say may not always be accepted or be wanted, it takes a lot of pressure off. I go into social settings, I go to family gatherings, I don't have to be anything. I could just be George. And if people ask me, cool. And a lot of times, once we start talking, I lead my interactions with compassion, empathy. I am assertive, but I'm leading there. I'm inviting them to say what they got to say. Sometimes they ask me about what I think or what I'm doing, and that opens that door.
Okay, you said a lot of things, and these are all really great because I'm just, processing a lot of it, and it's resonating a lot. I kind of, when you were talking about being 25 and then realizing, there were a lot of accurate opinion statements that were being said, but I wasn't prepared to receive them just yet, right? And I know that our brains don't fully develop until around that age anyways, 25 to 28, and so that makes a lot of sense because I know growing up, I also got a lot of unwanted opinions about how I should navigate. And you're right? Because my mom's advice would often come back now in my late 30s and understanding this is what she meant. So I think the importance of being receptive is also a skill that needs to be practiced for some folks, right? Or for all of us, honestly. And then when you said I'm a role model, whether I like it or not. Do you feel that that's a lot of pressure on you thinking that way? I feel like you've gotten a hang of this, the balance of I'm a role model and I still get to show up as authentically as myself.
You have to live what you teach and live what you say. If you're not doing that, you definitely will have a hard time with that. It took me a long time to arrive at this point of being. Jorge Valenzuela became a teacher. He was Mr. V. That was an alter ego. That was someone that I would become from 7 to 3 o'clock in the beginning. It took Jorge Valenzuela a few years to live what I was saying every day. As a father, being responsible for 2 young adults now, one is 21 and one is 19, you definitely have to toe that line and live what you say. And as a husband too. It might have been hard back then, and I think it was, but now it's a lot easier. Like I told you offline, I live a very uncomfortable life. I realize you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't have all the candy in the candy store. It doesn't work like that. That's not how life works. You have to have integrity. You have to be a person of your word. It starts with yourself, accepting who you are, knowing who you are, and then eliminating those parts of yourself that are not useful to you or to others, then really growing those things that you want to see.
Yeah, I mean, I have to be honest. You just keep it so real, all the time, which I want to surround myself with because I think I've just been living in Delulu for a long time.
And now for a word from one of our sponsors. If you're a STEM and PBL teacher like me, you're always on the lookout for new project ideas and resources. George does PBL, and I'm telling you, look no further than SmartLab. SmartLab really has a fresh take on STEM and PBL. I'm proud to be a partner, and they sponsor the podcast. But just don't take my word for it. Check out what other educators are saying about SmartLab.
When students enter into SmartLab, they are allowed to think outside of traditional norms.
It gives them a lot of agency. They feel empowered and important. I think that's one of the biggest benefits of the SmartLab environment and the way the project process is set up.
SmartLab becomes this place where they can do those things and have the time and space to communicate better and even deal with social emotional stuff. They're having a bad day. A SmartLab's a place where we can change the pace of what they're learning to match their mental needs for the day. And that comes back tenfold later on when they want to be there and they want to learn and they want to do stuff and they feel safe and they feel like they can get the things they need.
That's one of the big benefits of being in more of a collaborative environment is it makes you have to work. It makes you have to be accountable.
Please look in this episode's show notes for a link to connect with SmartLab.
You and I were texting and kind of talking, and you had really just called me in on like some of the behaviors that you've noticed with me of like, I was afraid to blank, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm like, dang, I got to process that. Like, leave me alone for a couple of days. Like, I don't know how I feel about what you just said.
In all fairness to me, you asked me for advice, number one.
Yes.
Right. I try not to, even with my kids or my wife. I always ask, you want some feedback before I give advice. But you asked me for specific advice. And I remember saying, I love you, number one. But number two, because you asked me, I'm not going to tell you what you want to hear. I'm going to tell you from the best of my ability what I think you need to hear. But I know that I was transformational because I provided you resources, a template, a framework for you to now be able to take the advice and implement it.
Yeah.
That's very different than just saying, well, you're afraid and you're blah, 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 and now figure it out. I don't do that.
No. Thank you for like clarifying, because that's exactly what you did with me. But you know, some people are like, oh my God, this is what happened. So that was like, and I didn't like hate you or anything for it. It was just like one of those things you're like, oh wow, like I did ask for it. And this was not what I was expecting. And this is feedback that's making me like feel really uncomfortable. And I knew that because I felt uncomfortable, this was a sign of growth that I needed to participate in, right? I didn't turn away from it. I didn't like, cuss you out or anything. I was just like, whoa, like I kind of knew this, but hearing it from someone else say it, like it made it more real, I think. And so I appreciate that. I appreciate that you were able to create the space where I could be receptive and that you could be like, hey, like you do these things well, and here are all the things also that could make you even better. And so I really, again, appreciate that part. And so again, just thank you. And I guess like listeners, you're probably wondering like, why are we talking about like our ways of being? Well, it's really important as educators to know like our thoughts, our biases, the way we act, the way that we are when we are doing the things that we're doing for our students, right? Like how do we show up in spaces? How do we create spaces that are actually brave and safe-ish for students to be themselves as well, right? I know when I was in the classroom, I showed up as myself. If my ADHD were all over the place, it was all over the place. And my students knew like, oh, Miss D needs a moment, or like Miss D needs to, do this thing right now. And so really providing this space that like I made mistakes. I showed up kind of messy sometimes, but it was real because we're all human beings. And I think a lot of the times too, George, when I talk with educators, because there's so many things that are expected of educators now, right? Like sometimes our ways of being just goes in the back burner and we don't think about it. It's like, oh, I got to talk about the standards. I got to teach the standards. I got to teach this. I got to teach that. And it's like not enough time to do all the things that we need to. And so a lot of the times our well-being is put in the back burner. So that means then our students' well-being is also put in the back burner. I think this also answers a lot of the questions about engagement, about motivation, about curiosity, right? Because I think, again, when students see themselves, when students feel heard and valued, they are really more inclined to pay that much more attention to what's happening in that space. So I really like that reminder as well.
A really good teacher is going to monitor three things: engagement and achievement. Engagement and achievement in the literature are strongly correlated. John Hattie once said this: any new initiative in your school, in your district, where engagement isn't factored in is doomed to fail. If people are not engaged, then they're not going to want to learn. And that goes for adults too. So you monitor engagement, achievement, but also you monitor your own impact. If you keep this at the forefront of your core teaching practices, then I think you'll be an expert at what you do.
Yes.
And it won't be about you. It won't be about you. Have you noticed that anything that we've talked about today hasn't been about myself? Even when you asked for my origin story, I found a way to turn my origin story into a conversion story. Looking at research and looking at analytics for podcasting and things in general that I do, I've come to learn that if you haven't achieved something great, people don't care about your origin story. They want to hear conversion stories. They want to be able to see themselves in the story and see what you overcame. For example, when I said, well, I didn't have the confidence I have now, the listener that didn't really care, or they're like, okay, let's get to the point. The minute someone says, I didn't have the confidence I have now, if they can relate to it, now they're like, okay, how did he overcome it? Because I have that problem too. I think when we do that, we're designing with empathy because we're using that qualitative data to inform what we're doing. It's about other people. Whatever you like to do, whatever you're into, you can do that on your own time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is such an important conversation. That is something that I don't often get to have, right? Of just like, let's talk about our ways of being so we can continue creating spaces for students.
For the audience, that was unscripted. That was not even any of the questions that were forwarded to me weeks ago.
And I mean, a lot of the questions that I'd asked you were actually not on our run-up show notes. And you've been so great at answering all of them because I'm like, oh, I have a follow-up question. This is another thing. Because I know, I don't know, but I pay attention to what our community needs. And I'm aware of like what questions will pop up or just clarifying questions or concerns or anything like that. And so this is just really important for us to continue evaluating our own emotional intelligence as we create spaces for students to be humans and to be students, right? So I just really wanted to reiterate that part because I think sometimes human beings and educators in particular just really want a checklist, just really want, like, I want an implementation or a strategy that I could do right away tomorrow, which we are providing that because George is sharing all the things that he's done and also understanding that there's deeper work that needs to happen as well. And it is continuous work. It's not, you'll never have an end day of when you're going to become that person, right? That you want to be. You're always going to improve. So I just wanted to reiterate that so that our listeners can understand like, oh, okay, like, yes, maybe I do need to ask myself some questions. Okay. So George, what do you hope to see in the future? What goals do you have?
Short term, I'm just focused on getting my dissertation finally completed. Long term, making a bigger impact through podcasting, online courses, and of course, my speaking engagements. I also have a brand new online course called Teaching Pro, Mastering Your Education Journey. And I'll put a link about that in the show notes as well.
Nice. You've got some really hefty goals to achieve, and I know you're going to crush all of them. So, okay, well, George, how can our listeners connect with you?
You can find me on my social media at George Does PBL. That is JORGE Does PBL. And on my website at lifelonglearningdefined.com.
Beautiful. And we'll put all of that in the show notes, y'all. So you could just click on it and follow George because he really does put some great content out there. Whew. All right. Well, George, thank you so much for sharing your experiences and your expertise. Thank you, George.
Whether you're a teacher or administrator, you lead by walking alongside your students and your staff. You teach them what to do. You model for them. Let's say you're in a situation where you don't know what to do and you bring in a coach or a resource, you learn alongside them. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. Now, the second thing is this. Give your people feedback, not pushback. Whoever you push back on, whether physically or verbally, they're going to do it right back immediately. And if they're intimidated by our position, our status, they're going to do it behind our backs and ruin our programs. My guy. I want to leave you on this note. Trajectories can be changed. When I was in 10th grade, here's a snapshot of who I was in 10th grade. There's a rapper named Rakim. I'm not sure if you guys know about Rakim, but he used to say, it's not where you're from, it's where you at. And I played that on my headphones at 16 years old every day until I believed it. And I'm showing you this because I'm seeing versions of this throughout American schools. This is your reality of what you have to face. If I can do it, any kid can do it, but they have to work hard. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Lifelong Learning Defined podcast with Jorge Valenzuela.